What is going on, Summit Chasers, and welcome to another episode of the Summit Chasers podcast. Very excited for this one. I know I say it all the time, but I am very excited for this one because this one, me and this individual were able to talk very candidly. We had a lot of similar interests. Little note, we do swear a few times in this one. And we start out by talking about Letterkenny. If anybody knows about that show, Letterkenny, it's a Canadian show, so it's very near and dear to my heart. It sets the tone for the synergy that we have throughout the podcast. I'm very excited for you all to hear it and get a lot out of it, and you will get a lot out of it, and not just knowing about Letterkenny or hearing about Letterkenny. Walker is a sales master, and I've been around and learned from and taught a lot of sales. The stuff that he teaches, the stuff that we talk about, that he dives deep into, gold, absolute gold. Whether you have a short sales cycle, a long sales cycle, or a multi-step sales cycle, you're going to get a ton out of this. So if you're a business owner, a sales leader in sales, who want to get better at sales, you need to listen to this. So with that being said, sit back, relax, get your notebooks out. You'll get like a London fog tea and something light so you can focus, like an orange or an apple or something like that, and enjoy the show. I love that dry.
It's so good.
There's not a lot of filler. It's just so...
And just the quick back and forth with no facial expression is amazing. And
the accuracy, first of all. So I grew up playing hockey, right? And those kids, the hockey, I can't remember their names, but the hockey kids, the way they talk, like puck bunnies, that is incredibly accurate. Incredibly accurate. Like, that could have been a documentary to my, from like 14 to like 17 years old hockey playing days. It was so fun. And the importance that we would put on, because I grew up in a small town, smaller than Letterkenny, actually. I mean, it's a fictional place, but smaller than that. Yeah. And there was kind of a line of like small towns, like between there's two major cities, there's Calgary and Lethbridge, and they were about 3.5 hours apart or something like that. And there was a huge, grouping of small towns in the middle, and we all kind of, coexisted. And but it was always, who's the toughest guy in Nanton was one of the towns. Who's the toughest guy here versus the toughest guy in Claresholm, which is where I grew up, and the toughest guy in Granham and Fort Macleod. And it was just so accurate, and like the importance you put on the tough guy.
Hilarious. I remember the fight they had.
I was not the tough guy, by the way. But it was so accurate. But anyway, see, this is what I mean. Like, we're talking about Letterkenny right now. This is perfect for everybody listening right now. I'm not going to cut a dang thing. But I am going to say I'm very excited for this one. We talked about a month ago-ish. Yeah. And we hit it off immediately. I knew I was very excited to get this guy on. Not just for the type of banter that we are going to be able to bring and the entertainment we're going to be able to bring, but he is very good at what he does. He's very good at coaching sales leadership, sales process, and getting people successful out of their own way in sales. So I'm going to start it off with a pretty easy question for you. All these questions should be easy because it's about you and your life. But
all right,
what was your kind of initial experience in sales where you were like, okay, this is I love this game?
Oh, I didn't love it for a long time. I was told when I was in college, I got into sales for all the wrong reasons to start with, right? My first job was with a bank. I was a branch manager, loan officer, way over my head, had no fucking idea what I was doing. And I was told you should go into sales because you can talk to anybody and you've got lots of friends. And which are two of the worst reasons somebody should pick to go into sales. Those are actually negatives. It means that you probably have a very high need for approval, which I did. I needed people to like me, and I talked too damn much. And so those are two things that are kind of opposite, that maybe it seems to some people you should be in sales, but nobody told me those were bad things. And so I kind of waffed along for a dozen years or so, just wondering what the hell was wrong with everybody else. Why didn't they understand? Why didn't they buy from me if I was such a great sales? What were they missing if I'm such a great salesperson? And so it really wasn't until after I hired my first coach, who I was convinced I didn't need, because I'm great in sales because I've got lots of friends and I can talk to anybody. Anyway, long story there, but I ended up hiring him. And all of a sudden, he kind of opened up for me the psychology of sales and sales process and all these things that I was completely unaware of. And I sat through a couple of classes with him and I was like, holy shit, somebody's giving me the keys to the kingdom. Now the scales have fallen from my eyes. I was such a dumbass before, and here is something that can absolutely change my life and that of many other people. So I was a convert within a couple of weeks, but it took me it took me a lot of punch in the face to get there.
Oh yeah. Well, then sometimes it's how people need to learn. What was it is? I mean, it is. What was like the thing that probably surprised you the most? Like you thought that you were great at sales for XYZ reasons.
Yeah.
When really, in order to be great at sales, it was AB reasons. What was like the biggest surprise? Like, oh, this is what I was missing.
Here's the biggest surprise for me was that sales is not about convincing people. Mm-hmm. Sales is not about me convincing you to buy something. I don't know about you, but it's funny when I look at this stuff now and I see how I like to be treated, and I knew how I like to be treated then. Somebody tries to convince me of something now, it's aggravating as shit, right? Why I didn't recognize I didn't want to be convinced, but here I was trying to convince other people, and that really that sales is more of a your job is to go understand. Your job is to figure out what's this person's situation. Do they have an issue that they are committed to fix? And that only comes from, I can see that you may have an issue you need to fix, but until it comes out of your mouth and you're committed to do it, it doesn't exist. And so to me, it was the subtle art of asking better questions, of not putting my agenda ahead of theirs. And then also the lesson that no has turned into my second favorite word. I hear it all the time. I love no, especially in the first meeting instead of the sixth meeting. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of rambling, but the thing I've learned about great sales is it's more about disqualification than anything else, not wasting people. If you're not going to be the right fit, find out quickly and get the hell out of there. And maybe you will be another time, but not now.
That is great advice. Like when I was doing sales coaching, and people would be almost they're gun shy. They don't want to get to the no or the yes sooner than later, because they think, okay, the longer I'm with them, the more I'll be able to your bad word, convince them that they need me. Whereas if I get to the disqualification process too early, I don't have a chance, when really now you're just not wasting your time. One of the kind of metaphors or analogies that really helped me in sales was understanding that your sales process or your sales meeting, it's just like taking off a plane. A plane uses, it's like some absurd number. It's like 70% or something of its fuel taking off and getting to altitude. So all the work in your sales conversation, your sales cycle, it's that front end. Like you're asking the questions, you're trying to find out what the problem is, you're trying to find all these kind of things, and then if you can get them to understand what their pain point is that you possibly could be the one to solve their problem, or at least that they need to have a problem solved. Now you're kind of coasting, right? Now you're kind of, you have their trust now, right? So that was always the analogy that it helped me understand, like, oh, okay, I can't just railroad them, right, and get to a yes or no right away, or prolong it, because then I'll run out of gas, right? So what would maybe some tips or tricks or something that you've experienced with, whether it's yourself or your clients? How do you break that barrier? How do you get the wheels off the ground? What's the best way to kind of build that immediate rapport and get to the problem as soon as you can?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I love your airplane analogy. I'd never thought of that before, but I really, really like that. I'm going to use that. And the first, my rule is when I'm getting ready to steal something from somebody, I'll give them credit for the first 2 times I tell it, but after that, it's mine. So,
that's I'll tell. Hey, that's better than none, man. I'll take 2.
What I teach another thing that was very powerful for me is when somebody showed me how the buyer's process. Have you ever seen the buyer's process, Zach? How buyers buy? Mm-hmm. They have 4 steps. The step 1 is that they'll ask about price. That's the first thing that the buyer did typically, because that's the only thing they can compare. If the buyer doesn't know anything about what it is that they're buying, what they can compare or they understand is dollars and cents. So they say, how much would something like this cost? If you make it through step 1, Then you get to step 2, which is where they invite you in, or you go over there and you answer a bunch of questions and you're happy because somebody's engaging with you and you think it's a great thing. And we call it, what do they call it? Buying signals or some bullshit like that. By the way, there's no such thing as buying signals except for a check. And then at the end, so then they say, can you put that in writing? And so you give them your information, you put it in writing, pricing, proposal, whatever. That's step 2, which is get free consulting. Number 1, they ask about price. Number 2, they get free consulting. Number 3, we're expecting them to give us objections or something, right? And most buyers say they don't want to wrestle with a salesperson. They don't want to do that. And so instead, they'll say, hey, this really looks great. I appreciate what you've done. Really impressive work like this. I need to think about this, or I need to check with my partner who's traveling in Europe, or let me get back to you. Why don't you call me back next Friday? So step 1, ask about price. Step 2, get free consulting. Step 3, say nice things and get rid of you.
Call that the brush
right?
off.
Yeah, the brush off, right? So we leave and we're like, they like me. This is great. They said to call them back next Friday. And so we then proceed and think, tell the sales manager, tell the boss, tell ourselves, hey, we got one. These guys like me. What a relationship. We can go play football together or whatever. And then we go to call them back and they've had our information and maybe they've given it to their guy who usually does this stuff for them. Maybe they've figured out how to do it themselves. Maybe they took it and shopped it to somebody else, but they've decided not to work with you sometimes, right? And so you go to call them back and they see it's you and they go, what a nice person, really helped me, but I'm not going to buy from him. So they send you to voicemail and your heart dies a little bit. And then you leave a nice voicemail. Hey, just calling to check in. Looking forward to doing business with you. Call me back, blah, blah, blah. And then call them back another time, a couple of days later, and they see it's you like, oh, God, I'm not going to do that. So they send you to voicemail. Heart dies a little bit more. And then you call back a third time a couple of days later, and they're like, this jerk has called me 3 times. Why didn't he get a clue we're not doing business together, right? If we follow the prospect's process, the last one's disappear, right? If we follow their process, they have all the control. Right. And so there should be no rule that your prospect has all the control. One thing I teach people is we've got equal business stature. I think you're probably in line with that as well. We've got just as much equal right. But the only way that we're going to be in only way we have any control at all, 50%, is to change the rules. And so what I talk to my clients about, I think you do this too, Zach, is to renegotiate the rules of the meeting before you start. Because if we don't change the rules, if we don't renegotiate rules, we're going to be followed by their rules. And so what I tell people at the beginning of your sales call, you come in, get comfortable, say hello, do that kind of stuff. And the first thing I say is, how much time did you set aside for this meeting? How long were you hoping this meeting would last? Ideally, I would have already done this on the phone to make sure, but we'll agree upon a time. Right? And then I'll say, tell me something. What were you hoping we could talk about today to make this good use of your time? I know how busy you are. Appreciate you taking the meeting. What do you want to talk about? And I'll learn what they're interested in, or what they'll tell me what they want to learn, right? And then I'll say, here's what I want to learn from you as well. And I'll get permission to ask about the things I want to ask about, like the gap between where they are, where they want to be. I want to know about your budget or the financial impacts of this decision. I want to know how you make a decision, right? I want to know those are you okay if we talk about that? I want to be as transparent and upfront as possible. And then I'm going to get permission to say, if I don't think we can help you, do you mind if I'm just straight with you and tell you so? If I'm not comfortable, if I don't think you should buy from us, if I don't think this is the right fit or we can help you, are you okay if I just tell you so? And ordinarily what happens is people go, that'd be great. I'd love that, right? Most people, or they might say, why the hell would you not be the right fit? And I'm like, well, I don't have any idea. But I don't want to sell you something you don't need or wouldn't be the right fit for us. And then I'll say, look, I need you to do the same for me. If at any point during this meeting, you don't think that you want to work with us or that we'd be the right fit, I want you to tell me no. And understand I won't try and change your mind. I'm not going to overcome your objections. You think you could tell me no if you're not sure? I said, well, usually they'll say, well, absolutely, I can do that, right? And then we got to decide. The other thing we can decide is that maybe there is a fit here. Maybe there is a reason we should work together. And then I'm going to point out what typically happens. Typically, at the end of a meeting like this, We're deciding whether or not you hire us to do A, B, or C, whether or not you write a check, sign a contract. Would you be okay making that decision today? And maybe they say, well, no, I can't do that because I need to get my partner involved. And I'd say, well, okay, how about this? Other times in your situation, we're figuring out whether or not you can endorse using us to your partner. So if you're not convinced that you would want to tell your partner we need to do this, at the end of this meeting, we'll call it a no. Is that okay? Right? Whatever it is, but at the beginning of the meeting, we're going to decide about what we're going to decide yes or no to at the end. And what I'm going to push for is a no. Because my whole point of the sales process is I have to have two thoughts in my head at the same time. One is, I'll just use myself as an example. I am absolutely certain that the sales process that I teach, that the skills that I teach people and the mindsets I teach people, I am certain if you give me damn near any sales force that's ready for change, I can help them dramatically. I know that in my head. That's one thought. At the same time, I have to be very, very skeptical that they're ready for me. Right? So I'm confident that I can help, but I'm not so confident that you're ready for me. And so in my sales call, my questions are, I'm trying to disqualify them. I'm guessing that everything is fine. I'm guessing that if they do have problems, that they're not enough to want to fix. I'm guessing they don't have a budget to fix it or couldn't find the money. And I'm guessing that even if they wanted to do that, they weren't going to make a decision for a couple of years. And all along the way, they've got to prove me wrong. And it's just it's a disqualification mindset. When I was younger in sales, I was taught a couple of things, right? You ask the right questions, which every salesperson is taught. And then I always wondered what the hell were the right questions. Nobody could tell me what those were other than open-ended questions or some shit, right? And so, and then the other thing was, be persistent, which is keep freaking calling somebody until they tell you yes, which I think is stalking. That is not good sales. That's stalking. And I forgot what my last point was, but every sales call should have a decision, a yes or no to something that was predetermined. And if it's not a hell yes, let's call it a hell no. And what's crazy is if you get to the end of a sales call or the middle of a sales call and you say, I'm not feeling it. I'm not hearing from you what I need to hear from you to think this is the right thing. Oftentimes, the person will say, you're right. And I'll say, let's not do this anymore. You're fine. Let's talk again when you're having problems with A, B, or C. And it's crazy because I had a guy that I talked to the other day. No, excuse me. Well, I talked to him 2 years ago. And I said, if you're not a hell yeah, let's call it a hell no. At the end of the meeting, he said, I'm just not a hell yeah. And I said, then let's call this a no. It's no big deal. It's fine. You're fine. You don't need my help right now. And what's funny is he called me back 2 weeks ago. I didn't remember his name, didn't remember the conversation. I got a text from this random person that says, I'm a hell yeah now. Right? And so I called him back and he goes, I'm a hell yeah. I said, who are you? He said, we talked 2 years ago about A, B, and C and I wasn't ready. He said, but I'm ready now. And that's what I realized that if I had pressured him to buy in some form or fashion, if I'd pushed for a yes, he would have not bought, and he never would have reached back out to me again. He wouldn't have done it. And so that's what in my mind, professional selling is helping somebody figure out why they're not going to be the right fit. Because 9 out of 10 people you talk to aren't going to be the right fit. Even if you're the best option in the world, most of them don't have to do anything or will choose not to do anything. In my world, right? They have to drink. I mean, even if you're selling water, there's a reason why somebody might not be the right fit for you. So anyway, that was a long answer to the question. I've forgotten what you asked.
No, I mean, you were answering it the entire time. No, and before this is for everybody listening or watching, before we started recording, Walker had asked me, when everything is done, when we're done recording, you hit stop recording. What do you want? Like, what would make this a success initially? That was basically what you were asking. And I think we could just stop right now because that was
Wow.
that was brilliant. But as you were talking, one of probably the best sales books I've ever read is not a sales book. It won't at least it won't be under the sales section. And books is Influence by Robert Cialdini. I've read that book
it's awesome.
3 or 4 times. But
One of my favorite books.
It's incredible. He's an incredible mind. Both of his books, well, he has a few, but Prefluence and
Power of Persuasion, Prefluence, there's some others.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But you're fighting for the disqualification, right? Like you're trying to get them disqualified, basically. That's kind of the mindset. But there's so much more that's going on. There's so much more types of influences that you're creating. And, they say, like, get a yes train, right? So by the end of this call, can we make sure that we have a hell yes or a hell no? Yes, we can do that. Okay. Do you have to is there anybody else that needs to be involved in this kind of decision? No. Okay. So at the end of this call, we can, if you want to move forward, you're able to. Yes. You're getting all these yes. So it's that influence of consistency. It's like consistency influence. People don't want to come off like liars. They don't want to come off as disingenuous. They don't want to come off as, sleazy or whatever that is, right? So you're creating that consistency influence. And then, like, you're also creating this trust, because, like, we might not be a good fit.
Yep.
And
right.
if we're not, we're both going to go separate ways.
Yep.
Right. So immediately barriers are down. They're no longer. They're just like, okay, cool. We're just gonna have a conversation. We're going to see if he can help me, and if he can, then we're going to move forward. And if we move forward, it means that he can help me. I'm not going to be convinced of anything.
Let me back up for a second. Let me make sure we're on the same page here, because I think it's the power of the people want to be consistent. If they say they're going to do one thing, they want to be consistent with that. I don't want to conflate that, because there is some, I believe, bad sales training out there, which is it's stupid stuff. Like, get them saying yes a lot, and then they'll just forget and say yes at the end. I believe that is, I've heard that before as a sales thing. I'm like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my freaking life. Right. But yes, people want to be consistent. If they say they're going to do one thing, they want to be known as being consistent. Mm-hmm. The other one of Cialdini's rules that I love is reciprocity.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If I do this for you, will you do this for me? And this is where I believe we have, I think I mentioned this, equal business stature with all of our prospects. Mm-hmm. And that starts with, I call everybody by their first name. All right. There's no Mr. or Mrs. It's John or Susan. And if I meet Bill Gates, it's hello, Bill. Nice to meet you. Right. If it's, somebody else who mows the grass, it's first name between them, and they call me by my first name. Right. That's what I want. But if I do something for somebody, I'm going to get something in return. For example, somebody says, how about come out, meet me at my office? I'll say, I'll be happy to come out there. If I'm okay doing that, will you gather up the information I'm going to need in case we end up doing business together? Mm-hmm. If I'm okay sending you a proposal, will you be okay getting on the phone with me so we can go over it immediately? Mm-hmm. If I'm okay, I'm trying to, what are some other things? If I'm okay giving you a discount, will you be okay buying 100 of them? Or whatever that is. I don't like to negotiate price, but some form or fashion, right? If I do this for you, will you do this? Because if you give somebody something and don't get something in return, they don't put any value in it. Yeah. So anyway, sorry, I took it off on a different level.
That's great. That the law of consistency isn't necessarily for them to say yes at the end. It's the consistency of them following through with what they agreed to, which is, let's make a decision. Like, there's no I need to think about it, right? Or there's or whatever it is, right? And if they do come up with that, like, I genuinely, this is amazing. It's just the price point. I need to talk to my wife. At least at that point, you have a better. You may or may not, right? They may just be brushing you off again, but at least there's a better chance of them legitimately needing to talk to their wife and like, okay, great. When's the next time that she can jump on? Maybe we can all talk about this together. They're more likely to do that.
Here's what I do. Here's what I do to somebody. When somebody says, well, I do have to talk to my wife, I'll say, that makes perfect sense. Can you do me a favor? Mm-hmm. Sure. I'm just going to call it a no. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. If you want to call me back, that would be great. And they'll say, no, I really have to do this. And I'll say, that's fine. When would you talk to your wife? And they'll say tomorrow. And I'll say, okay, great. Let's do this. If I hadn't heard back from you by tomorrow night, I'll just assume that she said, hell no, no big deal. Maybe we'll talk again another time.
And then they feel like they're missing out on an opportunity, so therefore they're going to be more likely to want to call you back.
Maybe, right? Maybe so. But it's just, I'm just being straight up. I'm just, because think it over, 75% of think it overs are just a long no.
Mm-hmm.
I wish it was 100% because then it'd be easy. But a lot of people in the South, I don't know about Canadians, but people I'm in Southern United States, Southeastern United States, and we do not like confrontation. And so people say, oh, let me sleep on it. Let me check with it, or let me pray about it, or let me talk to my wife, which really means I'm not going to buy this. Mm-hmm. And I'd rather just let them off the hook and say, well, let's just call it a no. At least I'm going to start there. Let's just call it a no. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Mm-hmm. No, I'm really going to do this. All right, well, let's get some parameters around it.
In Canada,
if you call me back in a week, I'm not going to. Huh?
In Canada, we just say sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry. And then we just hang out. We don't even give an explanation. We just hang out.
It does take thick skin. I think it takes a sense of humor too. I think a lot of salespeople take themselves so damn seriously. And I think we have to be able to laugh at ourselves. I think we have to, certain God, if you can't laugh at yourself, what do they say? You're missing the biggest joke of your life.
Exactly.
But being able just to not take ourselves so seriously, to be able to be self-deprecating, and to realize that, just because you think it's the right thing. Well, I'm working on a book. I just got my editor just sent back a version today. This is a second editor who I had a ghostwriter I worked with all along, and now we send it off to somebody else to read it and send back notes. So, but the name of the book is Some Will, Some Won't, So What, Who's Next? And that is literally my philosophy boiled down into 4 quick bullet points. Some will buy, some won't. So what? Who's the next person I need to be talking to? As soon as we fall in love with a prospect or we become emotionally involved, that we need this sale more than they need this thing, then we're dead. Then you begin reacting. You stop thinking, you just begin reacting, and then you're dead. So anyway.
Well, that's one thing I love about sales. Again, being somebody, competitor in sports, I could have went and won a competition or a fight or whatever sport I was in at the time. I could have won the game. That has to be very short-lived. Like, you can't fall in love with your performance that you had in the past, because there's going to be another one either next weekend, the next day, or in a month, whatever it is. There's going to be the next one, and if you rest on that, right, there's always another one. Like, you got to focus on the next one. There's still some things you could learn from. This next one's not going to be. You're not playing the same team, right? You're not playing the same team, so there's going to be different weaknesses. Totally different game, different strengths, different weaknesses, different opportunities, and different threats. So different problems to solve. So you have to have a short memory, really. Like, move. Yeah. Obviously, if you have to fulfill, like, if you're kind of an AE role, right? Okay, don't forget about them, provide the service and that kind of thing. But when it comes to the sales portion, right? Yeah. You have to
keep moving.
Just keep moving. If it's a numbers game, if you're in that type of sales role, or you have to make 400 calls a day in order to get something. Just because you had a record day today doesn't mean you only make 200 calls today. Right, you make your 400 calls, right? You have to have that short term memory. What is something that maybe would surprise some people, especially those who are already mostly self-perceived, to be really good at sales? Something that would be holding them back, that might surprise a lot of people.
Really good question. So, I think we are our own worst enemies all the time. I think that's universal. Nobody can argue with that. There are a couple of kind of hidden weaknesses. One of them is a need for approval. We talk about that, wanting people to like you. Another one is that we ourselves aren't very good decision makers. It's called I've heard it described as a non-supportive buy cycle. So if we're somebody that before we make a decision of any consequence, before we buy a refrigerator, before we buy a car, before we would sign up for something, we'd have to think about it, sleep on it, take time, talk to 5 people, get 10 references, whatever. If that's who we are, we believe that other people in the world are either like us or should be like us, right? And so if you take a long time to buy things yourself, you will believe that that's the right way. And you will either consciously or subconsciously encourage your prospect to take their time and to shop around. If you're somebody that has to buy cheapest yourself, you'll believe that's what motivates everybody. And you will be a discounter, and you just can't help yourself until there's this self-awareness where you go, what the hell am I doing, right? And so one of the things I tell people, if you want to be better at sales, get better at making yes or no decisions yourself. If you've got to go buy a washer and dryer or a car, or let's use a washer and dryer, for example, because nobody knows about a washer and dryer in general, right? How the hell do you know? There are 18 different brands and they're all made by 2 different companies. And so you go in the store like, oh my God, do I want this one or that one? What do I do? Who cares? I'll go to 3 stores, see if I can save $100. And the reason, if you think about the time you would spend and the time you spend researching, I mean, reality is have an idea in mind of what you want to spend. Go to a store that you trust, talk to a person that you trust, pick one, buy it, and go home. And if you can begin to believe that, all the people that we're supposed to be calling on in any business, the title of the person that we should be calling on and talking to is decision maker. And their job is to make decisions, right? And so if we knew that, and that's their job, then what we need to do is say, all right, at the end of this meeting, let's figure out whether or not we should do this. And then at the end of the meeting, if they can't say yes or no to that, it's a no. Now, again, I realize that, some people have a longer, more complicated sales cycle. I get that. And I'm not just saying we sell a contract in one meeting. But if you are somebody that, I worked with a financial advisor for a while, and he said, Walker, I deal with very wealthy clients. He goes, it takes 4 to 5 meetings for them to hire us. I mean, there's no way that somebody could move 10, 15, $20 million in one meeting. I said, maybe not. But I said, I bet they could do it in 2. No way, Walker, it's not going to happen. I said, well, do this. And it took him about 6 months to get up the courage. I said, how about this? At your next meeting, say, typically at the end of the first meeting, we're deciding whether or not we have a second meeting. And if we have, at the end of the second meeting, we're deciding whether or not you move your money over. I said, get the courage. I said, just say that. And he called me and he says, holy shit. We just moved $15 million over at a second meeting. And he's like, it just changed his world, right? And then 3 months later, he called back and goes, we just moved. He said, I'm going to try in one meeting. He closed a $22 million account in one freaking meeting. Why? Because he asked for it. Right? And he said, in the past, I would have drugged it through 5 meetings. I would have made them take 5 meetings. And he watched his numbers drop off half every next meeting that he had. Get out of our own damn way. And so not everybody's going to move $22 million in one meeting. But if after 2 or 3, they're still not sure, they're not going to do anything. And they shouldn't. Plus, in the wealth management business, if you've got a client that's not good at making decisions, they're a terrible client. They suck. They're hard to deal with.
You're totally right.
They're a pain in the ass.
Well, and there's that. It'd be interesting too if they had a very similar situation and typically on average we close in 4 or 5, let's say 5 meetings. We usually close on the 5th. It'd be interesting to take that and be like, okay, how many make it through from the first to second to third to fifth? What's the drop off?
Yes.
And
yes.
That would probably blow a lot of people away because what they would probably, we're so in sales, it's so hard not to get addicted to the vanity metrics because they would look at, okay, how many initial meetings am I getting? And then how many final meetings am I closing? They're not looking at how many are falling off in between as much.
Yes.
Nuts. And this, while you were saying that, one thing that this is not my first soiree into major kind of big ticket sales, but is having to find the champion like you're going through different levels within an organization, like especially in SaaS, if you're selling big software and that kind of thing.
Yes.
It's pretty typical. Is you're selling, you're not so much, because maybe the first person that you're talking to a champion. They're not going to be the person signing the contract and giving you a check. They're going to be the person that's going to introduce you to the person who can introduce you to the person who's signing the check and writing the contract, or signing the contract and writing the check.
Yes.
But you can still do these exact same things, setting the framing the meeting. That's what I call it. It's probably
same. Yes.
Yeah, you frame the meeting, but you're framing the meeting in them needing to take the action into the next step and getting the hell yes or hell no. The hell yes meaning that they're going to introduce you to the next level.
Yeah, that they can endorse.
The same thing.
Yeah, that they can endorse you to the next person and see if that person's open to a meeting.
Exactly. So I just didn't want, because I know that some people listen to this, they're in more of those complicated sales cycles that take the year. This still is extremely applicable to that, because you're selling them to put their neck out and introduce you to the next person, probably their boss or equal to their boss. Right. So that takes some cojones, and they have to trust what you're doing. And a lot of times those are the people whose problems you're solving. So if you can get them on board, they're ready to go and they're ready to champion for you. But again, just wanted to iterate that.
That's really interesting. And I agree with you, right? So we may find, and I put some words to what you just put, some other titles. You may be talking to the user who is currently having the problem, right, with the current software, with the current system. And like, this is it's glitchy, or it's buggy, or we've outgrown it, it doesn't work anymore. So their pain is in the operation of it, right? And their boss's pain may be instead more visionary, which is we're having trouble hiring the right people or keeping people or growing fast enough. He doesn't give a rat's ass about how hard it is to use. He's concerned more about the scaling of the damn thing, right? And so we have to be able to talk to each person about the things that they're experiencing and the gap between where they are and they want to be.
Yeah.
And so if I talk to the CEO about user problems, he doesn't give a shit.
No.
Right. And if I talk to the user about visionary problems, he doesn't connect with that.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be able to each one figure out what is the thing that what's their reason, what's the gap between the emotional gap between where they are and where they want to be. And if there is none, there's not going to be a sale.
Yeah. And this is where that can get really fun, is because a lot of times that champion, the initial champion, like you said, the user, or the the one that's dealing with the brunt of the problem, they've probably communicated this up a few times. So it's fallen on almost deaf ears. They sound like the teacher from Charlie Brown at this point. Exactly. So you at this point, you're not just getting them, completely, bought in, understanding their pain and bought into the fact that you can solve it. And here's what would happen if you solved it. You're also now going to have to coach them on how they're going to communicate the effects, right?
Right.
Because they're not, like you said, they just want to get the job done. This is just part of maybe a strategic initiative that they have, right? Where these numbers, that they need to hit these numbers, whatever it is. So you now have to coach them on how to communicate why this is important to them and how it's going to increase it's like the WIFM. What's in it for them, right? How is this going to improve solve their problem, right?
Correct.
In order to then set up that appointment sometimes. That's where it got fun, because now you have this champion bought in. And now you're almost coaching them on how, okay, this is how we can get the meeting. This is the outcome of what we could achieve for you, and this is how it could help them. That's how we're going to get the meeting. So much fun.
Yeah. So we say to them, hey, help me, help you, help me.
Exactly.
Right? What do you think that would resonate with the boss? What would you tell him? And then they can tell you what they think, and you can say, could you say this instead or in addition to that, right? And actually do coach them through. And oftentimes, depending upon what you sell, you can say truthfully, look, what we sell is hard. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I am sending you off to get your head cut off in a job you're not prepared to do. Can I tell you what might be the best is see if your boss is open to taking a call from me, and maybe me and you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because if he is your champion right now, you got to have his back. Mm-hmm. Right, we got to do whatever we can to support, because we want to help that guy help us.
Yeah, and you're partners now. You're Batman and Robin.
Yeah, we're in. Yeah. So it's a fascinating game.
Oh, it's unbelievably fascinating. It's easy to get lost in it. So, are you familiar with the concept of the red herring?
Tell me more.
Like a red herring objection. So there's
somebody gives you like a bullshit objection.
Yeah, well, there's the brush offs, which is kind of what we already talked about. Like, look, I got to talk to my spouse, and she doesn't get home until next week, so I'm not going to whatever brush off. They just don't want to hurt your feelings. Then there's the red herring where, let's say you sit down at a meeting and you're talking to, maybe there's three individuals in front of you that you're trying to sell your software to, and right away they sit down. They're like, look, we already talked to this person. Their prices came in as cheaper than yours. All right, so unless you can do that, I don't even want to hear the rest of your pitch. So it's a red herring. It's supposed to detract you and get you off your game, right? It's like the distraction. How would you overcome those type of objections? And this is from really any type of industry. I mean, even I have a client that sells windows. They come into the house and they're like, we just got a quote from wherever over here, and they came in at this price. Can you meet that? Like right away.
Can you meet that price? Yeah. And so here's what my belief is, that the only person that can overcome an objection is the prospect themselves. Mm-hmm. I think that when we jump and say, well, let me tell you about blah, 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 I think that it's Charlie Brown's teacher again. And so what I would say is, sounds like it's over. To start with, right? Sounds like it's over. And then I might get up and be ready to walk out the door. And I would say, before I go, can I ask you a question? You already have this software here that you say you like, and you're perfectly happy with it. If you had to think of a reason you'd spend a single dollar more than what you're spending right now, than what you could buy that for, could you even come up with one? Mm-hmm. And if they say no, I might say, makes perfect sense. You probably shouldn't then. Mm-hmm. Here's what some other people have told me. And we use what we call a third-party story. Mm-hmm. Some other guys have been in the same situation as you, and they could buy from this other company that's much cheaper. Here's what they told me. That they liked the fact that they said that our warranty, being 3 years, made a big difference to them, because they knew while this was a cheaper price, it was also no warranty, which made them very uncomfortable about something they were hoping to have for 10 years. But my guess is that stuff doesn't matter to you. Mm-hmm. Right? Other people have said these are the reasons. My guess is none of that stuff matters to you either. Right? So I believe when somebody says, basically, in effect, what you said, sell me.
Yeah.
Then most people jump into, let me convince you why. Mm-hmm. And instead, I don't want to sound like any other salesperson. Mm-hmm. And if somebody says, sell me, I'm going to say, I'm not sure I can. What would you hope to hear from me that can help you change your mind? Because it sounds like you got a good deal right there. And either they give me something or they don't. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I'm not here to play games.
That tactic that you had mentioned, where this is something that X, Y, and Z really enjoyed about ours. This is the results that they saw.
Third-party stories.
Third-party stories, yeah. If that third party, especially, is somebody that they know of, and either look up to, or maybe they're in competition with, or something like that, it holds even more weight. Because it wasn't written like this, and we keep coming back to Robert Cialdini's book. It wasn't written like this, but it's that FOMO, fear of missing out. Right? Yeah. Like it worked for them, and they're really successful. Okay, maybe there's something to this. Okay, let's start the meeting properly again.
And here's the thing, too. Nobody gives a shit about the salesperson's opinions. No. You're a salesperson. You have a vested interest in this. And I tell people that, and this sounds kind of, name of my company is No B.S. Sales, which I told my mother stands for no bad salespeople, but everybody else knows what it means, right? And so what I tell people is a third-party story saying what somebody else said. Maybe nobody said that to you directly. Maybe that conversation, maybe nobody said exactly that. But if what you're telling is what you were going to say anyway, if you're going to say, well, our warranty is better, I mean, they're not going to believe you, but they say, here's what some other folks have said. They value the warranty that we have, and they said that's made all the difference in the world. Or that they bought this one first, and it broke a year later, and shit, then they had to come back and buy from us. But I don't know if you care about that. But if I say, well, see, here's our warranty better, blah, 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 it as the kids say, it hits different when it's your opinion versus the person that you're channeling.
Mm-hmm. No.
And so I tell people, it doesn't have to be real, but it has to be true. Or it doesn't have to be true, but it has to be real, whichever one that is. I don't really know. But if you were going to say it anyway, you might as well say that somebody else said it.
Mm-hmm. No,
and I want us to be humble enough to not tell somebody, here's why you should. I can tell them, here's why other people did, but you got to make your own damn decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not sure it's the right thing, don't do it.
No, 100%, 100%. And so there's something that I want everybody to notice with what we're talking about right now. Like, we're not even halfway through the sales conversation right now. We're just taking the plane off, right? Like we're just leveling out at cruising altitude right now. Where I think a lot of what I know for a fact, because this is what I dealt with a lot of when I was doing sales coaching, is that they get so like, what's like this fun, fancy, cool thing I can say at the end when this objection comes up? Like, how can I like mind trick them into like wanting to spend all their money, right? So they get so focused on this like fancy that really doesn't even exist anymore, to be honest. Like I ask them to buy and then they say, I got to think about it, or I can't afford it right now, or I'm going to go shop over here as well to see if I can get a better price and compare. Yeah. And they're like, well, like what objection handling, like what objections, like overcoming objections can I use here? Like this is, I heard something really fancy in this movie I watched, or it's
right. Yeah.
All of that is, to your amazing point, when you're framing the call, a lot of it is handled then or shortly after that. It's not about if you had objections come up at the end, you screwed up something most of the time. You screwed up at the beginning. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So one
of the things that I do before we start, when we just talked earlier about laying out the meeting, how it's going to happen, the last piece of that I kind of skipped is we use something called my biggest fear. My biggest fear. And so what I mean is if I've had an objection that has come up a number of times, I tell people more than twice, then you need to bring it up before the meeting starts. For example, I might say, and we've already agreed on what we're going to agree to yes about. Then I'm going to say, look, my biggest fear is we're going to get to the end of this meeting and you're going to hope that my software is going to be cheaper than the other guys. Mm-hmm. If that's what you're hoping and that's how you make a decision, we probably ought to talk about that right now because I don't want to waste your time. My biggest fear is you only meet with me because you're nice and you really don't have any intention or ability to switch. And if that's the case, it's cool. Let's just talk about it now. Right? My biggest fear is that I'm talking to you at the wrong time, that you don't do budget reviews for another 9 months and there's nothing that you can change. My biggest fear is we get to the end of this and you're going to say, let me think it over. When what you really mean is no. And if that's the case, can we talk about that now?
Brilliant.
Right? Anything that's going to come up that's been a problem, bring it up at the beginning. As my rule is, if we're going to fight about it, let's fight about it up front instead of at the end. Because you still have leverage. Your entire leverage is your pricing and how you'd fix a problem. Once you give that away, you don't have shit. And so we got to make sure we get all the information we need before we give away our pricing.
Yeah. And at that point, you're just a commodity because now that's the only thing you can do is compete on price at that point.
On price, or they just take it and they shop it around.
Exactly. Or you have to add a bunch of services that otherwise wouldn't. And then that's even worse because now you're taking away time and resources. No, that's
death by 1,000 cuts.
Exactly. I have never heard that before. My biggest fear is I've never heard
my
that before.
Biggest fear.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
That is absolutely brilliant.
And I mean, and this is one of those things. If I do something for you, will you do this for me? If I'm worried, let's pretend I'm about to give them my information. My biggest fear is I give you this and you take it and hand it to my competitor and say, can you beat this? If that's going to happen, will you tell me now? All right. And here's the thing. One of my rules is you cannot get mad at somebody for doing something you didn't tell them they couldn't do. Mm-hmm. Right? And I realize we think, I love it. Salespeople are like, I got screwed because they shop whatever. Well, did you tell them they couldn't do that? Mm-hmm. Right? Did you tell them? And remember, sometimes they'll say, of course I won't shop it. And then they turn and shop it. I get that. You can't control that, but you can control that you brought it up.
Yeah.
You can control that you brought it up. And so I think it is, nobody's going to advocate for us if we don't do it ourselves. And we have just as much right to walk away. Not everybody deserves a proposal. Not everybody deserves pricing. I would tell you if I don't, most of the time when I do a proposal, I'm working out. Somebody says, how about put that in writing for me, to me? I said, I don't do proposals. I'm sorry. We have a handshake deal. We'll have a contract eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I need that in writing. I'll say, well, let's work on it together then.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll go through bullet points on the phone together as I work through it. And I'll say, here's a draft. And before I send somebody pricing, I'll say, look, this thing is coming in somewhere around between $5,000 and $7,000 a month. We're coming somewhere between $550,000 and $600,000. Am I even in the ballpark? If they say, oh, hell no, I say, all right, well, thank God I didn't send it over there.
Mm-hmm.
Again, before I send over, I'm going to go, here's some bullet points. Let's make sure we're still on the same page. If I send my thing over and I haven't gotten preliminary approval first, I'm failing. That's my fault.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as they've got the paper in their hands, they don't need you anymore.
Oh, absolutely. And you can't, that's one thing too, when we get salespeople, like, I got screwed on this one. Like, you didn't get screwed. You're just dealing with a person looking up for themselves.
Right.
They want what's best for them, just like we want what's best for us.
Yeah.
Ourselves. So you can't.
I got screwed as an excuse.
Yeah. It's absolutely. You screwed something up. You're just taking the blame off of yourself, something you could have done differently. And you're closing yourself off for improving in the future, like into the next game.
Right. I can't control them, right? Well, that's one of my real hot buttons about salespeople and anybody, quite frankly, are excuses. And I say that because I am a world-class A+ excuse maker myself. And the pivot points in my life and my career, the major ones have happened when somebody said, you know, that's an excuse that you're making there. And it's amazing. It's strange. The people, some whom I have very deep relationships with, who had the guts to call me out on that. And there are others that were just, I won't say just random people, but somebody that really took some courage to say to me, you know, I think you're making an excuse. Mm-hmm. And those are the moments I'm like, holy shit, I'm so glad you said that. Mm-hmm. As an example, I was, years and years ago, I was in the commercial real estate business, and I was riding to the beach with a friend of mine. We were going down, it was a company weekend. We were going to the beach together, and he and I started about the same time in the business, and he was making about 4 times more money than me. This is about 5 or 6 years in. And I asked him, I said, hey, Ben, why do you think it is that you are making whatever it was, $500,000 a year, and I'm making $100,000 a year? Well, what's the difference? And he said, I'll tell you the difference. He said, Walker, when I got in this business, my wife and 2 children and I lived in a single wide mobile home. And I got in this business and I promised them that I was going to build them a house. And so 2.5 years in, I was making enough money. I built them a house. And he said, we have a beautiful house. And he said, if I don't make this money, if I do not continue to generate this kind of income, we got to move back to the mobile home. I'm never going back there. He said, you're single. He said, if you make less money, you just buy cheaper beer. He said, the difference is, he said, this is going to piss you off. He said, I'm committed to making this money. He said, you're not. You're playing around. And I got pissed. And I walked around pissed at the wrong person for about 3 weeks until I realized he's right. I'm playing around. And he was gutsy enough to call me out on that. And it's funny, I tell that story a fair amount. And I write him, I just saw a local magazine that had a picture of his hunting cabin that he built, this gorgeous, beautiful hunting cabin he built in the woods. And I wrote him a little handwritten note, and I said, that's what commitment gets you. Right there, what he's got. And so had he not called me out, and that was part of the pivots that I've made, that's when I hired a sales coach. Mm-hmm. Was because I was like, I am over here screwing around. I don't know what to do different or better. And that's when I hired a sales coach who also called me out on making excuses. So I think in my training, I talk to people a lot about, it's so easy to say that it'll never, they'll never, it won't, blah, blah, blah. And instead, if we can change our language to, I haven't figured out how to get that guy to call me back. I haven't figured out how to sell something like that. Hadn't figured out how to make that happen or to make $1 million in this marketplace. And I believe that that words that we use matter, and that our brain believes whatever it is we say. And often our mouth leads, as you know, before our brains do. And so if we say, that'll never work, I'll never make it, those people will never do this, your brain goes, okay. As opposed to, we hadn't figured out how to get in touch with those people. We hadn't figured out how to deal with them in the right way. Hadn't figured out how to make money doing that. And I believe that really does create a process in your brain. Goes, how do we figure that shit out? How do we figure it out? Runs in the background. So that's my lesson. And I invite anybody and everybody who's around me that when you hear me make an excuse about whatever it is I'm doing or not doing, to call me out on it. Because I think that can be the major it's been one of the major things in my life, right? Is that one more quick example. I was about to quit. I had a very good job where I was making really good money. And I was miserable. I hated it. I hated going to work. I didn't like the people I was around. I just had burned out. And I wasn't going to tell anybody until my wife and I talked about it, but I was just going to keep it a secret until I quit. But I was very angry. And a client invited me to go to lunch, and I wasn't going to say anything to him. And I just was going to have a regular client meeting. And we sat down, and he greeted me in this way that I love to greet people, but he caught me this time. He said, "You look like shit," which is it's an awesome way, because people are like, what? And they'll start to think about all the problems they have. Anyway, he caught me off guard. And then when they said, "You look like shit," I was like, oh my God, I'm miserable. And I basically just told him the whole story of why miserable I was. I was going to quit my job. And I said, it's 50% my fault, and it's 50% this other guy's fault. And I look up, and he's giving me the stop sign. I said, "What?" He said, "It's 100% your fault." And I was like, "Okay, I know you're right. Tell me why." He said, "You need to know it's 100% your fault, because if not, you're going to be mad at the wrong person for the rest of your life." I was like, fuck, you're right. And all of a sudden, that, for me, I got my head screwed on straight. And when I went to my business partner to go resign, I was able to go to him with sincerely and with full empathy to say, "I owe you an apology. I've been a jerk for the last year. I've been difficult to work with. My head has not been in the game, and I know I've been an asshole. And I'm sorry. And the only way I know to fix this, to make it right, is for me to back out. For you to have the business, you take it, you go, I'll find my own course." And I think, had I not had that chance meeting with a client, had he not had the courage to say that, I would have gone into that meeting angry, with an agenda, and I would have blown the whole fucking thing up. And not because I would not have taken the responsibility that was mine. And so anyway, that's powerful for me to remember.
Well, that is such a powerful, that is a lesson that anybody can take a really strong lesson away from that. But that's something that even for me, and even if you look at other really, really successful individuals in history, a lot of them got to, or at least had their initial, streak of success because they intentionally took responsibility for things. And that's the key, is the intentionality behind taking responsibility for things. That means that sometimes it's not extremely apparent. Like you said, this is 50-50. It's 50% my fault, 50% his fault. Well, no, intentionally take 100% responsibility for it.
100%.
Now you're admitting that you can do something about it, and you can improve and create a better result next time. If you don't take responsibility for things, you're admitting by proxy that you are powerless to the outcome. But if you intentionally take responsibility for things, even if it's 80% their fault, 20% your fault, who cares? Take 100%. Because
and I think that was code for me. 50-50 was code for it's that son of a bitch's fault, which makes me the victim. And I'm not a victim.
Mm-hmm.
And thank God William had the courage to do that. And I said, that's brilliant. Where did you learn that? And he said, from you. Right?
If we take our own advice.
Yeah, it's just so hard, right? I'm so great at giving advice. It's hard to take it myself.
No, absolutely. And that was, I mean, and for me too, in my story, it's every time I was in a bad situation and I got out of it because I intentionally took responsibility for it. For everything. Right. And then, I mean, everything, therefore, I want to achieve this. I need to take 100% responsibility as to why I don't have it now. And in order to create the skills or the network or whatever it is to get it, like you have to, there's just no room for that anymore. There's so much, it is so easy to be a victim these days. Like some people, everywhere. And I've said this is probably the third podcast in a row where I've said this, but some people's worst part of their day is when DoorDash messes their order up. Like, you know what I mean? And then that's all their fault. It's like, no, it's your fault for not cooking and eating better. Like it's, you know, it's just ridiculous.
For God's sake, man, lighten up, Francis.
Exactly. I think that's a good place to end here. I could talk to you for days. I think it's obvious. We're going to have a part 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah, but we're vibing Walker, for sure.
Absolutely. But there's a question that I ask everybody at the end of these. But Walker, for you and your business, No B.S. sales, right? No B.S. sales training. What is the next summit that you are chasing?
So it's a great question. The next summit that I'm chasing, next thing I'm kind of excited about is the launch of the book. And so I don't have an idea about a timeline yet, but I'm just doing a guesstimate that it would be sometime probably midsummer that the book will be ready to be published. And maybe it's a little bit longer than that. I don't know. But the next summit for me is getting the book published, having a what do they call it? A launch of some kind, and just see where the world takes me from there. I'm kind of curious about what different, if anything, happens, what doors that opens. So I'm excited about that. That's probably what the next big summit is for me.
I love it. We'll make sure to have you on, whether that's our second or third time having you on, to promote the
You're the best, Zach.
Very excited about it.
Thank you. Let me tell you, Walker, this is a great podcast. Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate it. No, it's great when the guests like this, and all our guests are great, but it's always great when we can. Word of the day. I hate it. That I don't hate it. I just hate that I'm finally admitting it. Word of the day is we're vibing. The vibe. We're trying to act like, what is it, Gen Zers or whatever.
Right.
But go ahead, Walker. Plug. Where can people find you? Take 30 seconds. You can take a minute.
You know, my favorite place for somebody to find me is I have a podcast too. It's called the No B.S. Sales School Podcast with Walker McKay. No B.S. Sales School Podcast. Anywhere that you would listen to podcasts is probably there. My format is short, quick, 6 to 10 minute kind of sales tips, sales ideas, sales strategies. We post 2 of those a week. No B.S. Sales. If you look under podcast under Walker McKay, you'll find me there. So sign up there. What I'd ask you guys to do too is go to Zach's, where this podcast is, and subscribe to it, and also write him a review. That's the nicest thing you can do. He's not charging you to listen to this podcast. Write Zach a review. Give him 5 stars, because that helps put this podcast in front of more people. So that's how you can help Zach with, since you're listening to all this great content for free. And go to No B.S. Sales School Podcast, subscribe, listen. If you like it, share it with somebody who needs to know.
I love that. Thank you for plugging my own podcast for me. I appreciate
Happy
that, Walker.
to do, man.
That's the biggest form of flattery. I appreciate that. But I know for a fact, I'm not even going to say I hope, I know for a fact a lot of you everybody listening to this got so much out of this. Your notebooks are full. I hope you enjoyed whatever snack you are enjoying while you're listening to this. But until next time, everybody, keep chasing your next summit.